SwitchUp family, and welcome back to the channel. It's that episode where I go back and look at games that hopefully have been all patched up. Little hidden gems like Hogwarts Legacy that's just had a massive update, Dragon Quest Monsters. I take a look at the Hitman Blood Money patch, the massive No Man's Sky Adrift DLC / free update, and we take a really deep dive into Eiyuden Chronicles 100 Heroes big performance changes, and that of course will be receiving a rescore based on hopefully the work they've done. If this content is useful to you and you enjoy it, do leave a comment down below. I'm usually here for the first hour or so after release, and the algorithm just can't get enough of that. Alright, are these games all patched up? Well, my name's Mark Walker, welcome back to SwitchUp. Now let's find out. Let's start off then with Hitman Blood Money Reprisal. Here is what I had to say about the performance when the game first released.
Well, we're looking at 30 frames per second. That's generally locked out, although I did see a few stutters in a couple of areas. The performance isn't really the big issue for me. What is an issue though is that some of the optimization seems to have added a bit of instability. I experienced 3 crashes on the 3rd stage, and on the Asylum stage I also had quite a number of visual bugs. Notifications for objectives being completed were playing over and over again, so yeah, I do think there's a little bit of work to be done to tighten things up.
My biggest issue were the crashes. Now, from half an hour's play, which isn't a great deal, but it is on the stage that I managed to crash before, I haven't had a crash so far. This is also a stage that had quite a few frame rate fluctuations, and so far it does feel a little bit smoother, which I'm glad to report. Image quality remains largely unchanged, but if indeed they have managed to fix those crashes, then that's a real step in the right direction. What I will say is I was hoping potentially that we might see a 60 FPS patch, but according to the developers who actually responded to someone's YouTube comment, the Nintendo Switch isn't powerful enough. Now, without going into any details so as not to get Nintendo ninjas after me, let me tell you the Nintendo Switch is powerful enough, but not with all the underclocking Nintendo do to the hardware. So that's Hitman Blood Money. Next up, we've got Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince. I was really pleasantly surprised by this one. I thoroughly enjoyed it, with its take on the monster collecting genre. With that in mind though, I did have a few gripes about performance. Visually, Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince isn't exactly a stunner. From a technical perspective, you will see some low textures, some tessellation, scenery pop in, and also performance that drops below 30 FPS. Now, it's not Pokemon Scarlet and Violet levels of bad, but it's another area that isn't quite up to the Dragon Quest level of quality you may expect. Now, the frame rate seems much more consistent than it did when I first reviewed the game. The same can be said for frame pacing. This is very consistent now, and sure, there will be a few locations where you can drop it a little, but for the most part it's much better. Image quality is okay. You will still see some blurring, especially when there's a lot going on screen, and there is still the occasional bit of pop-in. What's really nice though are the amount of quality of life updates they've released for the game. This is the 6th patch since it came out. They've tweaked and improved many of the game's systems, and they've also improved things like the chances, percentage-wise, for getting the sparkling monsters from Synthesis. Any spawned eggs now show on your map, which is a big help. You'll see the monster size on the stat screen, and you can also check monster details directly on the Synthesis combo screen. That might not mean much to a lot of people, and there are more patch notes, so if you want to go check out the full patch notes, I will pop a link down in the description. But if you haven't played the game since it launched, those 6 patches have done a great deal to streamline the experience and improve it. Wouldn't it be good if all monster collecting games put this much effort into their post-game patches? Yeah. Let's hop on over to Hogwarts Legacy then. Now, I think it's fair to say that this was quite an impressive port. Nobody thought it would run at all, so here were my initial thoughts. Earlier areas actually run much better than this. Not that they're higher than 30, but they're 30 with better frame pacing. However, when you leave Hogwarts for the first time, you will see that frame rate drop down. The loading of assets when you transition an area does take slightly longer. It's one of those where you initially see very low textures and then everything will stack and build up around you. Now, one thing I didn't test when I first played the game was flying around on your broomstick. So I've included a bit of that and a little bit of running around the environment. And as you can see, frame rates do certainly take a hit. and we aren't seeing a miracle performance patch here with this. I would say frame rate wise things are relatively the same as they were before. What this update adds then is a restored quest that was previously only available on the PlayStation, a few new outfits, and I guess most notably it adds in a photo mode so that you can capture your own screenshots. Now we'll say on the Switch version capturing screenshots might not be your best option, but from there you'll be able to change things like the contrast, camera tilt, the zoom, depth of field. But I've got to say, I did expect a little bit more in terms of updates for this game, especially considering how long it's been out on other platforms. I'd say that most players would have expected this first big update to include new quests, not just restored ones from a single platform. I think it's a bit of a missed opportunity, honestly. And if you were wondering if it had improved performance on Switch, the answer, unfortunately, is not. It's very much where it was before, which is playable, but certainly not the premium experience. As is customary with No Man's Sky, the Switch version of the patch usually comes a little later than other platforms. You can guarantee the Reddit page will be filled with people asking when it's going to come out, as if anyone knows. But we do finally have the 4.7 Adrift update on the Switch version, so you can update that right now. I don't think I need to go back and show you what I thought of the original release. Let's just say performance wasn't great, but it was still quite impressive. Things are so much better. No Man's Sky have updated the game so many times since it came out. And as you can see from the performance graphs, it can hold that 30 almost all of the time, unless obviously you're base building, you can tank it doing that. But before I go any further, I must say there is an issue with this update. We're on version 4.7.0 on Switch, and on other platforms they're already up to 4.71.1, which fixes a lot of what I'm about to say. But for us, well, a lot of people are losing their Adrift expedition progress. So either finishing it or getting halfway, leaving their console, closing the game down, loading back up and finding that all of the progress they've made is gone. With that in mind, be really careful about which save files you're using. I'd suggest if you're going to play it at the moment on Switch, just start a new expedition entirely. You can access that from the main menu. It would just be, it would be pretty tragic to lose your save data. We also don't yet have any word on multiplayer. Now I know some people were saying the Switch couldn't handle it, but I'm not so sure. I think it could, but yeah, we don't have that yet. You can leave notes for people. I saw a few of those actually whilst playing this. But Adrift adds a ton of new content. I think I spawned on the world's greatest planet, or maybe that's all part of it. Felt like something out of Dune with these giant sea worms. Or sandworms, I should say, popping up out of the ground. You've got a whole nother quest line to follow. It's just so well done. But as I say, please, I would hold off until the 4.7.1 and 1.1 updates come out, because those do fix some major issues, and I just don't think they're in our Switch version at the moment. I really would hate for people to lose their progress. Imagine Earth has had a big update. Now, Glen reviewed this for us on the channel. We did a late review of it, and that's actually done really well, because I think, like us, a lot of people love strategy games, but that's not an itch that's easy to scratch on the Switch. Now, Imagine Earth is a very good game, but unfortunately it did have a few crashes and things. And so far, the performance has been solid. The visual quality is looking slightly better to my eye, but it's the crashes that mostly seem to have been resolved. Now, I again cannot speak for everyone. That's why beta testing is a thing, because you have multiple people trying out different things and invariably one of them will hit a bug. But from our experience, Glen and I, so far things have been improved and there are significantly less crashes than there were before. And it's a great game, by the way. You should definitely go check out his full review. Public service announcement for Life is Strange. Although we didn't do any coverage of this and didn't actually show anything on SwitchUp, I'm sure some of you noted that when it launched, the performance was horrible. Like, it was so bad. I booted it up and was like, my goodness, what on earth is this? You were talking like 20, 25 FPS, really stuttery, big frame spikes. There's been a patch out that has significantly improved performance, thank goodness. I don't know what had happened there. As you can see, things are running much better now. If you were considering picking it up or going back to it, now might be a good time, although I will say visual quality still is a little bit subpar. So then hopefully the one that many of you have been waiting for. This has taken me a lot of time. Digital Foundry, eat your heart out. We've got side-by-side comparisons. I completely messed up though, which is something they wouldn't do. So as you'll see in some of those, it looks a bit wonky. But here were my initial thoughts on Eiyuden Chronicles 100 Heroes performance when it released. You see 25 FPS consistently, with the overworld dropping down as low as 14 frames per second, and combat also joining those frame rates from time to time. If it was just a case of poor frame rates, I could overlook it for the most part, but that's not the case. There are also several crashes. So yeah, as you can see, the performance was so bad in some cases that actually significantly impacted our end of review score. But when I was getting so many crashes, the performance was that bad, it significantly detracted from my overall experience, and I did say when patches were available we'd revisit. So what they've done actually is way beyond my expectations. We now have 3 different graphical quality modes, those being graphics, which is basically high quality mode, balanced, combining a few elements of both performance and high graphic modes, and performance mode. Now one of the first things that I wanted to test, because this is quite interesting for nerds like me, it seemed, well initially, from some of our testing, that the rate at which you entered into battles was actually tied to the frame rate. So as you were running around the world, depending on the frame rate that was in the background, it would change the amount of time that you had to wait for combat. Now for me, I would rather have less combat and be able to move further. So I tested the 2 different modes. I just went here for high performance and high frame rate. So it's not a huge difference, but there is a difference there. So if you're someone that wants to avoid combat a little, actually using the performance mode here can help with that, or so it seems. As for loading into combat, well, it's exactly the same. I found it around 12 to 14 seconds, regardless of which mode you used. When we look at the 3 different modes then, we can see a few differences in terms of visual quality. Graphics mode here has quite a bit more shadow detail. There are higher resolution shadows as well, and there's an improved depth of field effect. And an interesting point of note is that the frame rate is uncapped. I find that a little strange, and we'll see that a bit more in a minute. Balanced mode deteriorates those shadows ever so slightly. Performance seems to be on par here, with perhaps some more aliasing in some of this scene. And then there's performance mode, which is doing its very best to strip out most of the shadow detail. Is particularly evident on NPC shadows. They are so low res that you can see them flickering, but honestly I don't really care. And then we get onto the performance that this then gives. Well, balanced and quality modes, as you can see, and apologies, this is where I said I messed up. I kept the colors all the same for some of these comparisons, which is ridiculous. But we can see that balanced and quality modes, they are about 30 in town areas, 31, 32 sometimes, and then when you move to the interior that goes up, which we'll talk about, but the performance mode is a sizable jump up. The biggest difference for me, when in town at least, is some of the frame pacing. I noticed that frame pacing is only able to get to a certain low, I think it's in the 30s on performance mode. For the other 2 you just won't see that, and that will result in a slightly more delayed experience in terms of frames reaching your screen. The slight inconsistencies in quality and balanced also means it can feel a little more stuttery even when the frame rates are the same. Now, one of the biggest concerns I had when the game first came out, other than the crashes, again, which we'll talk about, are the world map areas. These ran at 24 frames per second. We see a similar experience here. Balanced and quality once again try to hit 30, it will dip down to 24, but performance mode comes into its own. You're looking at 34, 35 FPS, and again you will see that big drop in the frame time. It might not look like it, but when you're playing it feels significantly better, with that 10 frames per second advantage. Now you may have hoped for 60 FPS, and I've got to say I haven't actually been able to hit that, but when we go inside buildings or in dungeons, it certainly gets a lot higher. This is where I noticed that the balanced and the quality modes are uncapped, going up to around 35, but performance mode hovers around 45 to 50, which, yeah, it's much better than it was before, and you really do feel that. For what you're losing in terms of visual quality, Well, it's basically the anti-aliasing and those dropped shadows. In performance mode, you see a significant drop in the quality of edges. It really isn't something that bothers me though. I'm all about performance and I want that smooth experience, so for me, I'm definitely going to be sticking to that mode. The next thing is the crashes. Well, I haven't had any crashes so far. I redid the entire section, which was the cave section where I experienced the most of those, and I haven't had a one. Whether or not that means you'll have the same experience, I don't know, but I can certainly say, anecdotally at least, they seem to have fixed some of the crashes. With all of this taken into consideration, it certainly is more enjoyable to play. Now, full disclaimer, I've actually played this on other platforms and I love it. I think it's an amazing JRPG, and the Switch version was just like, what on earth have you done here? Now though, although it's not perfect, it shows the amount of dedication and effort that they've put into it. I know they've suffered their fair share of loss and they are very keen that this game, which for them holds a lot more meaning than just being a game, is presented in the best way it can be. So yeah, fair play to them, well done. I will be revisiting it again if they update it again, but I think they've done a great job and a lot of you are going to be able to now really enjoy the game. So that's it. What a beast of an episode. I didn't think it was going to be this big, but I hope it was of some use to you. As always, let me know down in the comments. Do let me know any other games that you want to see revisited. I know I said about Bloodstained. I do understand there is a big update for that, so I do need to go and check that. And Octopath 2 has also had a big update, so yeah, lots for me to do, but I do love making this series, and I know a lot of you enjoy. Thanks to our Patreons, our members, all of you that enjoy the content. And as always, for all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers, guys. See ya!